Dive. 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 Good morning there. It's time for another submarine story. And it's morning. The mid-watch is over. We rigged for blue. I guess if you wanted to be rigged for blue, you'd be in sonar. But I couldn't be a sonar tech. It turns out my parents were married to each other. So, having said that, we'll press on. Today, I had a couple of stories swirling around in the old bucket up here and things I want to get out. And I might actually make a couple of stories and put one in the bank for later. But the one I have to tell now is a drunken alcoholic story, because sometimes Pat's stories involved drunken alcoholism. And for those of you who don't know, Pat's an alcoholic. I'm recovering. I'm at about a day 150 or so on this time around the rodeo. But things are going pretty well, and I have no complaints, and I go to meetings, and I've got a sponsor, and shout out to Jerry. How you doing, buddy? But I need to tell this story because it's how I spent my 19th birthday in restriction in A school in Orlando, Florida. So here we go. For those of you who might not know, I wanted to be a sonar tech first, and I caught sonar on fire on the USS Henry Clay once during battle stations when I was mess cooking the first week that I was on a submarine, and I was banned from sonar by life by Chief Palmer, who was a very nice man who didn't think kindly at all that I'd set the PQQ-3 on fire. It's a long story. It doesn't involve flame or cigarettes. It involves equipment malfunction. And I'd like to tell you it wasn't my fault, but I was the guy who fell asleep, and, well, the Q3 caught on fire. That's a story for another day. So much for being a sonar tech. But the captain, E.C. Fisher, had a policy that if you qualified submarines and you didn't go delinquent, or you qualified in your first patrol, you could go to any A school that you wanted, and he'd get you there. So I ended up making friends with a whole bunch of missile techs, and I wanted to be a missile tech. So that was called Swiss A School, and you may have heard in another story that I went there, met a Medal of Honor guy that checked aboard Swiss, and things didn't go well for him when he was checking in. He called the whole command out, and they had a big parade inspection, and it sucked to be some second-class guy who was a dick to him in the middle of the night. So, but I got there, and the math was completely out of Pat's realm. I mean, there was no way I was doing from adding in division to subatomic fractions to God knows what the hell they were doing. I don't even know the name of all the stuff they were doing past geometry and trigonometry. It was just like, it's like they were shooting missiles or something. I have no idea what was going on. But so I bailed out of that, and I was able to salvage getting to be a torpedoman out of the whole deal and going to Orlando for TMA school, which to anyone who's ever been to 8 weeks of TMA school in Orlando will tell you maybe the greatest gig in the whole world in the history of submarines was going to Orlando, where all the female boot camp graduates got out once a week, and they did their walk, they got out, and they were all there, and they had nothing to do. And oh, if you happen to be a fleet returnee and you had a car, that was quite a thing to do. So not only was I a fleet returnee, I had a brand new 1980 Turbo Trans Am, which I would polish on Wednesdays and Thursdays and go over there on Fridays and pick girls up as they got out, and it was quite an experience. And because of that, I had lots of friends, like friends who wanted to ride in the car, because riding shotgun with Pat in a Trans Am as you pulled in over there and waited for the dust to settle and the little girls to go out on the town, and there'd be those one or two little girls looking around who didn't have a ride, didn't have anywhere to be. They're in their little whites, and they didn't want to go on the bus tour to Disney, and they were there, and they'd see the guy in the black shiny car. So of course I had to have a walking leisure suit, because we are talking it was 1980 and we were dressed for the time. So I had the shoes with the 2-inch heels, and the shirt that was open, and I was wearing a chain, and I'd be sitting there, I'd be, hey baby, you want to go for a ride in my car? And of course they'd say yes. And sometimes it amounted to things that it should have, and sometimes it amounted to things that it shouldn't have. But anyway you went about it, there's usually drinking involved. And it was Orlando, and it was 1980, and there was plenty of drinking to be had. So the other part of that was these girls would always come out with a pretty hefty paycheck, and they were not bashful at all about buying you drinks and spending it on you. Or, hey, I want to go to the beach, let me put gas in your car. Bingo! You're my new best friend. Let's go to the beach. Well, there was this one girl, and I'm not really remembering so well, but I'm thinking her name was Joyce, and she may be the only girl I saw twice while I was there. She wanted to go to the beach, and she wanted to go to the beach in the worst way. She wanted to go see the ocean. She had never seen the ocean. She was like from Pig's Knuckle, Arkansas, or somewhere equivalent, and she wanted to go to Cape Canaveral and see the beach at Cape Canaveral. It had to be Cape Canaveral. So we set up a date for the next weekend, and I hooked up with this guy. His name was Jimmy Fox, and Jimmy Fox was like Jimmy Grady if Jimmy Grady had been 6'4" and played tight end on a really good football team, because Jimmy Fox was a slick little hustler who was 6'4" and happened to play tight end for a really good football team. He bailed out of college when he broke his knee, and he was coming back to try out submarines. He was a fleet returnee as well. He had air crew wings, and I was a fleet returnee. I had dolphins, and we were both going through the first couple of weeks of the submarine end of torpedoman A school. So this girl Joyce decided that she wanted to go to the beach, and she had a friend who Jimmy seemed to really like. So there were 4 seats in the car, and there's really a 5th seat in the back, but it's a Trans Am. Let's not get too carried away. The back seats weren't very comfortable, but it's about 60 miles out there to the beach, and she was getting off on Friday, and she had a weekend off before she was traveling to wherever the Navy was sending her, and I have no idea where she went. Anyway, she ended up front seating with me, and Jimmy was in the back with this other girl, and we decided that we had to have a keg of beer. Well, it was Friday, and we got over to where they sold the beer at the back side of the club, and they weren't open. And it worked out that we had a lot of Fridays off. We would work 10-hour days, Monday through Thursday, and for reasons that are completely unbeknownst to me why you would do this, we ended up having a lot of Fridays off. This is one of the Fridays that we had off. So, and this girl coming out of boot camp, they finished boot camp on a Thursday, and Friday was a travel day, so they could get to where they were going for Monday. So here it was, Friday morning, about 10 o'clock, and the club was supposed to be open around the backside where they sold kegs. Well, I got there, and they weren't open. Well, you can't buy a keg of beer if the place that sells the keg of beer is not open. So we started looking around, and we found a note on the door, and it was from some lady who happened to be the manager that said that they were going to be late, and they weren't going to be there till 11 o'clock. So they were supposed to be open at 10 o'clock. Well, it was like 2 minutes after 10, and we were itching to go. I mean, the car's full of gas. I mean, I'm ready. I have already stopped and bought the ice to put the thing in, to put in the thing that goes around the keg to keep the keg cold. So I got like 20 pounds of ice waiting in the trunk of the car, and the T-tops are off. The radio's blasting REO Speedwagon because, oh, by the way, I mentioned it was 1980. And we're sitting there, and it's kind of like, oh man, we got to wait an hour for the beer. And all of a sudden, to this girl Joyce, the beer wasn't very important. Well, me and Jimmy, we were fleet returnees. We were both 19 years old, and we were in Florida, and the drinking age was, about 18. So it was really important that we had beer. So Jimmy looked and said, hey, check this out. And he grabbed the door, and he opened it, and the door just opened up. I mean, it was literally unlocked. No joke, on my mother's grave, the door was unlocked. And Jimmy opened the door, and we looked at each other, and we walked in the back of the club. Well, the club is a pretty big place in Orlando, but they keep the kegs right there off to the left, and these giant, I mean, these are huge reefers. You open the door, and this is like a reefer that you would have on an aircraft carrier. And there were probably 30 or 40 kegs of beer all stacked up in there. And hey, if you're going to take a keg of beer, you don't take the old Milwaukee, right? You take the Heineken. So we got this little pony keg of Heineken. It was probably, I don't know, they're like 7 gallons or something. And they have a little like bucket that looks like the front end of a torpedo that you take off the nose cone on a torpedo that you put the keg in. So we took one of those things, you put the ice in, and we put it in the trunk of my car, and we went and we picked up the keg, and we carried it back, and we set it in there, and we poured the ice all around it, and we put the little tap thing on it, and here we go. We're all jazzed up. Beer is flowing. We grabbed some cups. We put them in the car, and I wrote a little note and left it on the bar, and I pulled a $50 bill out of my wallet. I left it there, and there are no cell phones. It's 1980, so I didn't leave a cell phone number. I just said that I lived in Barracks Series, whatever the hell it was, and I was at TMA school, and here's the money for the keg, and we'll be back when we're done with it. Well, it turns out if you take the keg out of the club while the club is closed, some people may call that theft, as in taking without paying, which is the definition of theft. Now, this will be germane to the story later, because did I mention I left $50 on the bar? Yes, I did. Thank God. So, it turns out the price of the keg of beer was about $25, and the rental for the keg and everything else was about another $15. And there was a deposit on the keg, so I may not have left enough money in total to cover the deposit on the keg and the beer that I bought and the tap that I borrowed but I left $50 on the bar and a note with my name on it, and man oh man that really mattered later. So off we went to the beach, and through the course of several hours and driving, and I won't tell you that I was driving while we were drinking beer, but there was actually a little pass-through. If you pulled the little thing down, you could pull the keg thing in, and the girls in the back were, by this time Jimmy and I were both up front. We'd stopped for gas or something, and the girls got into swimsuits, and they had their hands out the T-top, and they were loving life and living large and screaming in the back and standing up and dancing, and while we were going down the road, the beeline heading right toward Cocoa Beach. And we got there and we drank all the beer, way too much beer for 4 people. And we ended up buying more beer and just moved the keg aside and put some more in, and we drank some more beer. And we got home. She was on Cinderella Liberty. She had to be home by midnight, and we got her home about 11:58. Joyce and her friend, I can't remember her friend. Her friend may have been like something like Linda or something, but neither one of them had ever been to the beach. And they ran up and down the beach, and we drank beer, and we ended up getting something to eat right there. There's a Pizza Hut. If you take A1A, is it A1A? It's not A1A. It's the Beeline Expressway. If you take the Beeline Expressway out of Orlando, Florida, and you head right for Cape Canaveral, when you get there, when it dead ends, right there where Ron John's Surf Shop is, which, by the way, was a great attraction, and lots of T-shirts were sold. When you get there, there's a Pizza Hut right there as you dead end in the T-bone on the road. The Intercoastal runs right there. And we ate at that Pizza Hut twice that day, and it was a great day. It was an awesome day. It was something to write home to Mom about, and I'm sure both of those young ladies did. But we got them back in time. I mean, I came across into that parking lot doing about 40 mile an hour, and I should have been doing about 10, but I was doing about 40 mile an hour. I locked up the brakes. I turned it halfway sideways. The music was blaring, and they popped out, and there was some first class lady there with a clipboard, and she was checking names off, and she was like, "You ladies certainly cut it awfully close." And it's like, yes, petty officer, have a nice life, petty officer, go fuck yourself, petty officer. It's not midnight yet. So Jimmy and I did what normal guys would do. We high-fived, and we said we had a great time, and we were hoping to see those young ladies again the next day. And I think we actually did see those young ladies the next day on their next day of liberty, and because I managed to stay free until Monday. And so this would have been like right near coming up on Memorial Day, because the way things worked out and me ended up where I was on the 5th of June for my birthday, it had to be pretty close to Memorial Day. Anyway, I drove back around to the back side of the club, and I pulled up, and there was a little lady there who was the manager, and I got out and said, "I have something for you." And she said, "What would that be?" And I said, "It is an empty keg and a little thing that goes on top of the keg and a little thing that the keg sits in that you put the ice in, and here it is, and I'd like to give it back to you, and do I have any change?" And she said, "Change for what?" And she said, "Do you have a receipt?" And I said, "No, I ain't got no receipt, but I left $50 on the bar." And the next thing you know, they called the shore patrol people and I got arrested. And they took me in and I had to write a statement. And I didn't get out of there like 3 o'clock in the morning. But they turned it over to my command, and it didn't all go as well as I had hoped for. But I kept telling the lady, but I left the money on the bar. But I left the money on the bar. And I actually did end up getting money back, because if you leave a deposit, they return the deposit, right? So if the beer costs $30 and the rental of the thing that goes in the keg is $7, right? We're at $37, and anything past $37 comes back to Pat when we're done drinking the beer. So they actually ended up returning me like $11.50 and after tax, and I got money back. So I was pretty happy about that, and I thought I was going on my way, and they wrote this little report. And, yeah, did I take your beer? Well, yeah, I took your beer. But I left the money on the bar. Well, come Tuesday, when I got to Captain's Mast, Captain's Mast, that's right, Pat went to see the skipper, and they wrote me up for theft, which I believe is Article 132, theft by taking. And I explained to the captain right there. We walked in and the captain said, "What do you have to say for yourself, Seaman LeBlanc?" And I said, "Sir, I stole nothing. I left money on the bar. And it's not my fault they left the back door open. It's not my fault they weren't open at 10 o'clock when they said they were supposed to be there. And all that beer was just sitting there. And, sir, I did what I thought was the right thing. I left $50. I left my name. I told them where I lived, for God's sake. And I left the money right there. And I came back and I gave them back their stuff. And they even gave me change." Well, the captain agreed with me up to a point that I had not done theft by taking, although I did a whole bunch of borrowing. So they dug up something in Article 134. There was something about conduct unbecoming, but I think they charged me with conduct unbecoming a petty officer. And I was like, "But I'm not a petty officer." He said, "Don't argue the fine points here, son. You're getting off light." And I said, Aye, sir, because sometimes you need to know when to cut bait, and sometimes you need to know when to fish, and this was definitely time to fish. So I said, "Aye, sir." And he looked and he said, "It looks like you got a birthday coming up." And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And he says, "Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do." He said, "I'm going to put you on restriction for your birthday." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "So know that you're on restriction from now until your birthday's over." He said, "You get off restriction at midnight on the 5th of June. He said, "So 6th June you can be a free man." He said, "But you're going to spend your 19th birthday in restriction. And you're going to spend it right here in Orlando." He said, "Because you did something you knew you should not have done." And I said, "Sir, and he said, "Would you like to spend more time in restriction? Like perhaps the rest of the time you're in Orlando with me for 30 days? And I said, "No, sir," because sometimes Pat knows the right story when told. Sometimes you can tell me something and I know that you mean it. And he looked at me and he had that look like he meant it, because he used his pointing finger and everything. So I decided that spending restriction for your birthday, for your 19th birthday in Orlando, Florida, was not the worst thing to happen. But I wore dungarees for the next 6 days and walked around, and they marched me everywhere I had to go. They would march me to school and drop me off, and I was like a legend in my class. I was a legend to the two E5s who ran TM school down there. And we were down doing the submarine portion of TM school, and this guy's name was Swing or Swaim or something just like that. And he looked at me and he said, "Let me see if I got this straight. You broke into the back of the club, you stole a keg of beer, and you got 6 days restriction." I said, "But petty officer, you got the story all wrong. I didn't steal nothing. I left money on the bar. The door was open." And he's like, "You have to be the luckiest son of a bitch to walk planet Earth." He said, "There's no reason you should not be an E1 swinging your dick on out the door, and you should be done with the Navy." He said, "You broke into the club, you stole stuff, man, and they only gave you 6 days restriction." I said, "But I left $50 in a bar. I told them where I lived." Anyway, that's my story. One more night of drunken debauchery. But I made it home. Everybody made it home alive. Man, I still wish I had that car. But that's all today for Submarine Stories. And that's how Pat spent his 19th birthday in restriction in Orlando, Florida, for stealing beer. Y'all have a great Navy day. I enjoyed telling you the story, and I'll get on another one. Maybe the next one will be about Springfield. I need to tell a Peter Furman story. That's what I need to do.